During the development of Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, the team came up with the idea for another PSP title to follow it up, and development on the sequel would begin very shortly after MPO was released. And while Hideo Kojima had originally planned to leave the project in the hands of the MPO team, he wanted to make the game's message more clear for a younger demographic, opting to join the team as the project director shortly after development began, meaning that he was working on both this new PSP title and Metal Gear Solid 4 at the same time. This project would then come to be known internally as Metal Gear Solid 5 Peace Walker, but the team would end up dropping the numbered title as they didn't feel it was right to put a numbered entry on a handheld system, simply titling it Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker instead. Kojima and the team wanted this to be the largest Metal Gear game to date, so they gave it a lot of time in the oven, with the game eventually being released in April of 2010. So would Peace Walker be able to meaningfully build upon the handheld format that Portable Ops brought to the table, or would the game be held back by the split development focus between it and the then newest numbered entry? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 14th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Metal Gear game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along in preparation for Metal Gear Delta. And while you don't have to have seen the rest of my videos in order to enjoy this one, you will be missing a lot of important context about my journey with the series if you haven't seen them, so I'll have the full playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to go check those out first. But with that out of the way, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker is a stealth action game developed by Kojima Productions and published by Konami for the PlayStation Portable in 2010. The game opens 4 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, with Big Boss and his newly established Militaire Sans Frontières in Colombia. And I am so sorry that you had to hear that pronunciation that I will only be referring to it as MSF for the remainder of the video. Big Boss arrives at the base on his motorcycle, finding his men running through a training exercise on the beach, which they then invite him to join, and this training serves as our tutorial for the game. We get taught the basic controls, and they're bizarre to say the least. It's worth noting that I played the original PSP version of the game, as like I've mentioned many times on the channel before, I'm much more interested in reviewing the game as it was originally released, rather than a version that was fixed up and improved years later. And while for earlier videos in the series, that meant things like playing a version of Metal Gear 2 that doesn't have changes made to the dialogue and story to better fit with the lore of the series later on, or playing Metal Gear Solid 3 with its original camera angles, but Peace Walker is easily the game that changed the most out of any game I've reviewed so far in the series in later re-releases. As far as the controls are concerned, the default and recommended control scheme of the game aims to replicate the feel of Metal Gear Solid 4, but as I'm sure many of you already know, the PSP was lacking a fairly important couple of buttons when it comes to third-person shooters, those being the left and right triggers. The PSP also lacked a right thumbstick, so the developers had to get a little creative here. So what they opted to go with was movement being handled by the C-stick and the camera control being handled by the face buttons. So if you press triangle, the camera will look up, if you press circle, it will look to the right, you get the idea. But just wait, because the weirdness doesn't stop there. Pressing up on the D-pad is the action button now, being used not just for interacting with the world, but also as the reload button when no other interaction is available. Holding left or right on the D-pad will open the item or weapon menus respectively, in which you then use the square and circle buttons to navigate from left to right. On top of that, the game improperly registers the analog input from the C-stick, so if you're holding the stick in a straight cardinal direction like up or down, Snake will move at full speed, but at any sort of diagonal angle, he'll start slow walking instead. I was more than able to get used to the absolute weirdness of the controls during my playthrough, but it took a good bit, and they still weren't as smooth as any of the home console games in the series, or even Portable Ops for that matter. And as I've said before on the channel, I'm of the opinion that a good control scheme isn't just one that you can use smoothly after many hours of gameplay, but also one that new players will be able to pick up and get to grips with quickly and easily. Once I got over the initial weirdness though, I was incredibly happy to see that the crouch walking mechanic that I loved so much in MGS4 had been brought over, but with a very interesting change along with it. That change being that crawling along the ground has actually been completely removed here. You can still hold the crouch button to lay flat against the ground, making you much harder to spot, but you can't move at all while doing so. I'm not entirely sure why they removed the ability to crawl, but since crouch walking is such an amazing option for moving around quickly while staying concealed, I can't say that it's a removal that you really notice past the first hour or so. CQC techniques also return, of course, sort of being Big Boss's staple at this point, and it's even been expanded a good deal here. Now, instead of grabbing an enemy or throwing them, you can actually grab an enemy, choking them or interrogating them for a short bit, and then throw them without needing to let go of them in between. This is a particularly helpful change, especially since throwing enemies to the ground doesn't instantly knock them out anymore, something that we'll come back to in a bit. Also expanding the utility of throws, there's the addition of chain takedowns. If you throw an enemy to the ground and there's another enemy standing close by, you can simply press the CQC button again, and Big Boss will swiftly move over to them and throw them to the ground as well. This is incredibly helpful when trying to deal with groups of enemies non-lethally, and it's definitely one of the coolest additions Peace Walker makes to the core gameplay. After finishing up the training with our men, Big Boss's new right-hand man, Kazuhiro Miller, pulls up, telling us that there's someone who would like to meet us. We go with him to a meeting with a scholar from Costa Rica who tells us that there have been sightings of an unknown armed group in their country. He tells us that they're bringing in advanced weapons and equipment, saying that they believe the CIA may be providing them with funding. The Costa Rican government has it written into their constitution that they can't have an organized military, so they've come to hire us to deal with the threat, offering us a forward operating base just offshore if we help out. Snake tells him that they're not simply dogs of war, denying his request and telling him to find a more political solution, but the scholar tells us that their hands are tied. He then introduces us to his student that came along with him, Paz Ortega, and it's revealed that both her and Miller's names mean peace in their own respective cultures. Paz begs Snake to help protect the peace of her nation, with the professor revealing that he knows Snake is actually Big Boss, and that that's why they've come to hire us specifically. And can I just say, I'm so glad that they stuck with the hand-drawn animated artwork that they used for the cutscenes in Portable Ops. There are some cutscenes in Peace Walker that are presented using IGCs or in-game cutscenes, but the vast majority of them are done in the exact same style as MPO, with the artist of those cutscenes, Ashley Wood, having been brought back for Peace Walker's production. They were easily one of the most charming aspects of Portable Ops in my opinion, so seeing them return here was awesome, and I can't quite put my finger on why, but I feel like they look even better here than they did in that game. After our meeting with the scholar, we cut back to the gameplay, with Snake arriving on a beach in Costa Rica. We're given a big open area to practice with the controls, probably because they're so janky, before we move forward, and Kaz says that he's glad we can finally leave all that business in San Geronimo behind us. Now, this is a line of dialogue that a lot of fans have interpreted as a jab at Portable Ops and a sort of in-universe acknowledgement that Portable Ops was no longer canon to the overall narrative, but as I'll come back to at a more appropriate time in the video, I don't really agree with that interpretation. And while we're here on the beach, this might be a good time to talk about the game's overall presentation. It should go without saying, but if you compare Peace Walker's visuals to other console or PC games from 2010, it doesn't hold up very well. But considering that this is running on the PSP, which is essentially a handheld PlayStation 2 in terms of hardware, it's hard to be very critical of how the game looks. There are some smaller effects that look pretty bad here and easily could have just been cut from the game for a cleaner overall look, like the very low resolution bloom effects that they used, but I do respect the ambition considering this was a PSP title. The one thing that really hurts the presentation is the return of the 20 FPS limit from Portable Ops, which, as many of you pointed out in the comments of that video, likely isn't being used because the frame rate actually needs to be that low to run on the hardware, but rather to prolong the PSP's battery life. Much like I said in the MPO video, not only does the lower frame rate hurt the game's visuals, but it also hinders the gameplay, especially when it comes to how responsive the controls of the game feel. At the end of the day, it's not the fault of the team at Kojima Productions, as it is a hardware limitation, and I do respect the ambition, but it's still something that players will notice, and it's very much worth talking about. After running around on the beach for a bit, we cut back to the scene with the professor, with Kaz trying to convince Snake to help them out. Snake explains that he's worried that if they settle down somewhere, they might become like the warmongers that MSF has been fighting against in recent years. Kaz tells Snake that MSF isn't an army, but that it's rather a business, before Snake tells him that he's pretty sure the professor is actually a KGB agent and he doesn't want to get involved in a potential national conflict. We bring the scholar and Paz back in, and Snake confronts the professor with his suspicions. The man doesn't even try to hide it from him, explaining that Russia wants to take control of Central America since it would give them a great strategic advantage in the Cold War. He also reveals that the Soviets are already involved in a conflict in Nicaragua, and that the CIA is likely setting up shop in Costa Rica to be able to swiftly respond to whatever happens there. He wants us to infiltrate and investigate the CIA forces in Costa Rica, telling him whatever we learn before driving them out of the country. He explains to us that Paz doesn't even know of his KGB affiliation, telling us that she managed to escape from some CIA soldiers with her life, but her friend wasn't so lucky, handing us a cassette tape that Paz had when they found her. It's a recording that her friend took while out in the jungle to research some birds, but they ended up picking up a radio signal by accident, and on that radio, the voice of the boss is clearly audible. Snake is shocked to learn that she might still be alive and hiding out somewhere in Costa Rica, and he agrees to take the job, telling the professor that he's doing it for Paz, not for the KGB. And I have to say, I wasn't super interested in the setup to the story here until the boss's voice popped up. The fact that she might have survived the events of Operation Snake Eater and is hiding out in the country that we're getting sent into had my brain racing with different possibilities of where the story could go, and I was itching to see what would happen from here. We cut back to Costa Rica, and here we get our first real stretch of gameplay. Aside from me still struggling with the controls at this point, the stealth here feels pretty good, having just about everything that we've come to expect from the franchise post MGS2. And almost immediately, I go to pick up a grenade, but I get a message telling me that I'm already carrying the maximum amount, and that the supplies have been sent back to Mother Base. As we'll get into soon, the base management aspects of portable ops have returned here, but instead of needing to have a soldier with you who specializes in delivering supplies back to base, it's now just done automatically if you pick up more supplies than you can currently carry. As much as I loved the specialized roles that we saw in portable ops, needing to switch characters just to send an item back to base did slow the pace of the gameplay down quite a bit, so this is a very welcome quality of life improvement. After sneaking around for a bit, we eventually enter the facility, overhearing a guard talking on the radio about the spears they're bringing in as cargo. We jump in to take him down, with players needing to complete a QuickTime event in order to do so. I know a lot of people despise QuickTime events, but I don't mind them as long as they aren't thrown at the player constantly or used as a replacement for actual gameplay, and Peace Walker is guilty of neither of these. I actually thought that they were particularly fun in this game because seeing them integrated into the animated artwork was actually really cool. Once the guard is down though, we steal his radio, using it to call Kaz. We tell him what we heard, as well as the fact that there are dozens of film badge dosimeters laying around, which are devices used to measure radiation exposure. Kaz is shocked, saying that the spears they're talking about must actually be nukes. We then cut to a screen that ranks our performance during the mission, and for a game made up of very small, bite-sized pieces of gameplay similar to portable ops, these are a really fun addition. A bunch of missions in this game will even offer unique rewards to you if you can earn the coveted S rank on them, meaning that if you're the type of player who likes to strive for perfection in their gameplay, you'll be heavily rewarded for it here in Peace Walker. On our way back to Mother Base, we get a call from Miller, who explains that Latin America has a deal with other countries that prevent them from moving, testing, or being involved with nuclear weapons in any way, saying that if the US decides that they no longer want to hold to that deal, it's going to lead to some major political fallout. He also tells us that the professor said we should try to get into contact with the commander of the local rebels, as they might know more about the CIA operations in the area. Once back at Mother Base, we're introduced to the various forms of base management that Peace Walker offers. Firstly, much like portable ops, you can capture enemy soldiers while out on missions, converting them into your own troops, and giving them specific roles around the base. The first two teams that your men can be assigned to are explained to the player and opened for staffing here, those being the combat team and the R&D team. The first one is fairly straightforward, with players being able to control soldiers assigned to the combat team during missions, or send them out on operations of their own that are opened up later in the game. Soldiers in the combat team are also responsible for producing the income of Mother Base, as the only way that MSF can actually make money is by taking on missions for others. And the longer you keep a soldier in the combat unit, the more effective they'll become in combat, which will also increase the amount of income that they bring in for you. So the more soldiers that you have in your combat unit, the more incoming revenue you will have for your base, meaning that these guys are very important to MSF, even if they seem really simple at first. The R&D team is also fairly self-explanatory, with these soldiers collectively working on researching new weapons and technology, then producing them. But in order to produce this new tech, you'll need to find design specs, which are another new addition to the game. While out on missions, there's a chance that you can find documents in the field that actually turn out to be blueprints for new weapons or items, and certain unique blueprints can also be obtained as rewards for specific missions or S ranks. Once you have a blueprint, you can use the credits brought in by your combat team to produce the item, and after a set amount of in-game time has passed, you'll be able to equip and use that new tech in missions. And on top of just finding new item blueprints, you'll also find blueprints that lead to upgraded versions of weapons or items that you already have, which will do things like increase the maximum amount of ammo you can carry, increase suppressor durability, or even add attachments like suppressors or grips to weapons that didn't previously have them. The R&D team is the primary source of player progression in the game, as the work of this team is directly tied to the strength and effectiveness of your gear, meaning that, again, this team is incredibly important to try to build up and maintain throughout your playthrough. Once I'm done learning about all of that and assigning my men though, I make my way over to the mission screen, being very happy to see that much like Portable Ops, there are side missions that you can take on to earn extra rewards not available in the main campaign. The quality of these missions can vary quite a bit, with some of them just being simple shooting ranges or other similar mini-games, and some being proper 15-minute missions where you sneak into an area to complete a specific objective. There are way more side missions available here in Peace Walker than there ever were in Portable Ops, and unfortunately, I would say that Portable Ops had more consistently high quality side missions when compared to Peace Walker, but when Peace Walker does have a good side mission, it often has one that is way better than any on offer in the previous handheld entry. So the side missions aren't necessarily better or worse than Portable Ops, just less consistent. Some side missions will even force you to play as soldiers other than Snake in order to complete them, and while I do really enjoy the game taking the occasional opportunity to do this and show you that your soldiers do actually have an impact on your efforts, it does showcase one way that Peace Walker takes a step back from Portable Ops. While you can still play as your own soldiers, and they do still have different numerical stats, they don't feel unique to one another the way that they did in MPO. In Portable Ops, some soldiers would have unique gameplay skills that others didn't, like being able to drag bodies twice as fast, or having varying levels of CQC abilities, with some of them not being able to use CQC at all. Here in Peace Walker though, whenever I played as a soldier of mine, it just felt like I was playing as Snake with a smaller health bar and psych gauge. I understand that from an in-universe perspective, this is probably the result of Big Boss's training leading to a more skilled and homogenized militia, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a little bit of a letdown from a gameplay perspective. While checking out these side missions, I also realized that the camo system is once again returned here, but as per usual at this point, it's very different from any previous iteration. It's most similar to the camo system from MGS3, but instead of pausing the game and changing camos on the fly mid-mission, you instead need to choose what fatigues you're going to wear before deploying, and you'll be stuck with those for the duration of the mission. I do like this change compared to what was done in MGS3, as I feel that it places a little more emphasis on players planning out their mission ahead of time, but there is a bit of a dominant strategy problem here. See, a little ways into the game, players can unlock Snake's sneaking suit, and if you're looking for camouflage, this is simply going to be the best option the majority of the time. Obviously, it makes sense that the sneaking suit would be the best all-around option for stealth, but I got this thing about a third of the way into my playthrough, and once I did, the entire camo system just kind of became redundant. This wouldn't have been as noticeable if the sneaking suit was placed near the end of the game like it is in Metal Gear Solid 3, but as Peace Walker released, the camo system is really only important for the first few hours of the game. Also, during these early side missions, I learned about Peace Walker's new method for capturing enemy soldiers, that being the Fulton recovery system. This is a balloon-based surface-to-air recovery system, allowing objects, individuals, really whatever, to be lifted up into the air for recovery by plane. Once a soldier has been knocked out, players can simply equip the Fulton system from their item menu and press the interaction button on them to immediately capture them. The Fulton recovery system does have a limited number of uses per mission, but this number can be increased through upgrades by the R&D team. This is another huge quality of life improvement, allowing you to simply press a button to capture an enemy and move on, rather than needing to drag them back to the truck at the beginning of the level like in Portable Ops, and it helps out a ton with the gameplay pacing by comparison. As I'm starting to get a feel for the game, I get a call from Paz with her saying that she learned in school that war is the default state of mankind, and she tells us that if we want peace, we have to make it for ourselves. Snake tells her that he thinks her ideas are admirable, saying that if he finds her friend while he's out on a mission, he'll let her know, and we go off to find the rebel commander. And while I'm making my way over there, it struck me that Peace Walker has a very similar issue to MPO with the practically unlimited resources like ammo and suppressors. If you haven't seen my video on that game, well, first of all, you should, it's a good video, but I talked about how the tranquilizer gun in Portable Ops was even better than it was in any previous Metal Gear game because of the ammo refilling and the suppressor having its durability topped off at the beginning of every mission, meaning that you'll never really run out of syringes or break a suppressor. It works the exact same way in this game, and the tranq gun is still incredibly powerful because of it, but at least the upgrade and progression systems that are present here make it feel a little bit more earned than an MPO. Regardless, still a huge issue with the game's balancing. Eventually though, we reach where we believe the commander to be, but when we get there, we're told that he's dead, meeting his daughter Amanda instead. She tells us that a factory to the north of us might be a base of theirs, also telling us about a transport boat that's moving up into the mountains, but saying that she doesn't recommend going up there because of how many people they've been losing in the region. We talk with her about her father's death, and her younger brother tells us that with him now dead, she's the de facto leader of the rebellion. She tells us that he was a hero, and even though the men here trust her, she couldn't ever live up to his legacy. Snake tells her that leaders don't just wake up and choose to be so, and that they're simply people who rise to the occasion when they're needed, something that he would have learned firsthand during the events of Portable Ops. Just then, some sort of large drone flies in, opening fire on everyone. We get this fun little minigame where we have to shoot it and other smaller drones down with rockets, which is charmingly done through the animated artwork of the cutscenes again. The drone retreats, and Amanda and her men run after it, leaving Snake to reflect on what the hell he just saw. Miller calls asking us what it was, saying that the hardware that they have here is very unusual. Snake tells him that we need more intel, saying that we need to follow Amanda to ask her for more info. As I'm going after them, I also discovered that Peace Walker now allows players to shoot from inside of the cardboard box, which is a huge buff to the item's utility. This addition also led to the discovery of the real weapon to surpass Metal Gear, the Sleepy Love Box. The only real downside to the cardboard boxes here is that they completely remove your camouflage modifier when using them, and that they get progressively busted up and even break when taking damage. And no, I'm not going to make a joke about how busted up your mother's love box is. I did think about it, but I'm better than that. We eventually reach the base that Amanda was telling us about, encountering a large group of enhanced soldiers, as well as an armored truck, leading into our first boss fight of the game. Now, you might think that I started spraying at the soldiers with my M16 before blowing up the armored truck, but I wanted these stronger soldiers in my ranks, so I actually snuck around tranquilizing and retrieving them one by one before opening fire on the truck. And after hitting the truck with enough rockets, the captain actually popped out to man the turret himself, so I tranquilized him too, allowing me to recover him and the truck itself as well. I would later learn that being able to capture the truck was no scripted story moment though, as there are numerous boss fights against vehicles here in Peace Walker, and there's a very specific way that you can approach them in order to capture the vehicle and add it to your own army. And that approach is, coincidentally, exactly what I did here, as if you capture or kill the soldiers in the arena before being detected, it will guarantee that the captain appears later in the fight and allow you to capture the vehicle. So yet again, Peace Walker very directly rewards you with increased power progression if you can meet a certain skill requirement, and while I wasn't a big fan of the vehicle battles before I learned about this mechanic, I can now confidently say that I love them as a way to make MSF stronger. Just after this fight, we see the large drone from earlier, so we go to catch up and see if we can find Amanda. When we get there, the drone is trying to capture her, so we hit it with a rocket, causing it to drop her and retreat. She tells us that her brother Chico has been captured by the enemy, saying again that she could never replace her father as a leader. Snake tells her that he's going after the cargo, telling her about the nukes, and saying he'll try to find her men while he's up in the mountains. He asks her to join our unit until she's healed up from her fall, properly introducing himself as Snake, and she seems to know who we are before she passes out. Kaz then calls us, telling us that we need to ensure that we have enough provisions to feed the team, introducing the mess hall team into the mix. This is another team that we can assign troops to back at Mother Base, and they're in charge of providing food for MSF. If you aren't producing enough food through the mess hall, morale will start to fall, leading to your soldiers' stats decreasing for the time being until you manage to solve the problem. On the flip side though, if you have way more food than is necessary, morale will start to rise, and soldiers will actually perform better than ever before. If the mess hall team only existed to take troops away from other teams to meet a minimum threshold, it would be a boring and somewhat obnoxious system, but since it's another possible way to enhance your forces, it once again becomes fun and engaging. And with Amanda needing some medical attention, we also start up a medical team for the base. As in-game time passes, soldiers will become sick or injured, and when this happens, they'll be taken away from their post and sent to the medical bay to get treatment. If sickness goes untreated for too long, it will start to spread to other soldiers throughout the base, and you'll end up with a massive problem on your hands before you even know it. The more experienced medical staff that you have, the faster wounds and sickness will be treated, allowing soldiers to get back to providing for Mother Base more quickly, and of course, preventing large outbreaks from happening. And as an additional benefit, once you get your medical teams level high enough, your R&D department will be able to produce new specialized tranquilizer weapons for you, such as sniper rifles that fire tranquilizer rounds instead of lethal rounds. So yet again, this is a system that could have been an annoying minimum requirement, but there's enough depth here to make it engaging, and being able to enhance your technology through it only encourages players to engage with it more. After messing around with that for a bit, we get back out in the field, eventually finding Chico and asking him if he knows where they took the cargo. He tells us that the cargo gets brought into town on a train before being loaded onto a truck and disappearing. He also tells Snake that there's a monster up in the mountains that they call El Basilisco, and that none of the men who have gone up there have come back, other than one time that he saw it after running away from a fight with his sister. Snake asks him why he would have run away, and he explains that everyone in the rebellion always treats him like a kid, and Snake tells him that growing up means choosing how you're going to live your life, asking him to come back with us. Chico says that he can't go back and face everyone though, revealing that the CIA soldiers tortured him and he gave up the location of his fellow resistance fighters. Snake encourages him to come with us and show us how strong he really is, and eventually Chico agrees to join. And with Chico being so good at gathering intel, but still being too young to really fight, we start up an intel team back at Mother Base. The higher the level of your intel team, the more info that you can get before deploying on missions, such as the number and rank of the enemy soldiers present, whether or not there are any POWs in the area that we could recruit, and more. And much like the medical team, the intel team can also lead to new tech for the R&D team to produce, with the most noteworthy of these being the care packages and support strikes. These are markers that you can earn through having a higher level intel team that allow you to call in resupplies of things like rations or ammo, or even call in a mortar or missile strike on an enemy. So they've essentially just pulled over the intel team system from Portable Ops and expanded the functionality to work better with Peace Walker's overall progression systems, and once again, I found it really enjoyable. And at about this point in the game, it became apparent to me that not only has the poor AI from MPO been carried over, but it seems to be even worse here than it was in that game. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but the enemy AI here is some of the most clueless, must-have-been the win type guards that I've seen in ages. I have an absolute mountain of clips from my playthrough of me sitting only a few feet away from guards while being directly in their line of sight and no alert being raised. I'm sure that much like with Portable Ops, this was done to make up for the poor controls and frame rate of the PSP, but man is the AI just flat out dumb here. And on one hand, I get that when you play as Big Boss at this point in his career, you kind of want to feel like the greatest stealth operative of all time, but on the other hand, I feel like some of that badass feeling that you get as a player does come from having at least some challenge presented to you and overcoming it through your own mastery of the game's mechanics. As enjoyable and satisfying as the stealth is in Peace Walker, it's just way too easy for my personal taste, and I would love to get a game that has these exact mechanics, but with guards that actually pose some sort of threat to the player. We eventually reach the rail yard that Chico told us about, getting there just as the nukes are being taken away on trucks, before we're suddenly ambushed by a tank and a number of soldiers, leading into our second boss fight of the game. This is pretty much the same as the armored truck fight, except the tank obviously packs way more raw firepower and much heavier armor. It's not a complicated fight by any means, but it's definitely the first real challenge the Peace Walker offers, as it was not only the first time I had to use any rations during my playthrough, but I actually used almost all of them before managing to take the thing down. We get a call from Kaz telling us that the trucks are likely moving to their base in the north, so we ask Chico about a way into the mountains, and he gives us some directions to get there, though he also warns that it's likely the Basilisco is in that area as well. We eventually infiltrate the mountaintop facility, finding the cargo trucks that we saw, but the cargo has already been offloaded. We then overhear a discussion between two men, with one of them seemingly being upset with the other, saying that he thought they were making a deterrent, not a weapon. The other man explains that the weapons are the deterrent, saying that they need to show them that they're actually capable of launching a nuke. The man in the wheelchair says that he won't let them use his creation like that, but the other man says that he likely stole the design from someone else anyway, and the man in the chair rebuts that he's the one who stole the idea of bipedal locomotion from the communists to begin with. The bald man tells him that the Peace Walker is useless unless they can prove that it's capable of actually launching, throwing the man in the wheelchair down the stairs and walking away. Snake jumps in, asking the scientist where the nukes are, and he tells us that we need to stop the other man before he can launch a nuke. We chase after him, and we watch as the strange ship from earlier airlifts what looks like a Metal Gear out of the hangar before another craft that looks somewhat like the Shagohod from MGS3 flies in to confront us. We get a boss fight against it, and the scientist from before contacts us via radio, telling us that it's called the Pupa, and that it's one of the AI weapons that they've developed here in Costa Rica. It's a pretty entertaining fight, essentially being one of the vehicle battles from before, just on steroids. The Pupa is equipped with machine guns, Tesla guns, and boosters that allow it to move around the arena at high speeds, with it using those boosters to try to run you over, or even move along the walls while hammering you with machine gun fire. To defeat the Pupa, players once again simply need to deplete its health by shooting at it with whatever weapons they have, with what part of the Pupa you hit dealing differing amounts of damage to the boss. Once the Pupa has been disabled, the scientist tells us to jump into the large AI pod on the front of it, so we follow his instruction, entering the pod and dismantling the AI's computer by hand through a little minigame. Once we've dismantled the AI, we leave the pod before it detaches itself from the Pupa and flies off into the distance. The scientist then comes down to meet us, introducing himself as Huey Emmerich, meaning that this man is the father of Hal Emmerich from previous Metal Gear Solid games. Snake asks him if he made the weapon that they airlifted out of here, with him answering yes and no, before we ask him what the CIA is working on here. He tells us that the nukes were loaded into the machine before they moved it, saying that the project is nearing its final phase. He explains to us that they use this facility to develop unmanned weapons like the Pupa we just destroyed and the Chrysalis, the other giant drone that we've seen flying around lately. He tells us that the CIA hired him to develop these weapons, and that their main objective was the construction of the Peace Walker, an unmanned nuclear weapons system. Snake recognizes that it's a new Metal Gear, and Huey tells us that they plan to produce dozens of them, but first they need to prove that the project is valuable, so Coldman, who is the bald man from before, plans to fire off a nuke to show the higher-ups what the Peace Walker is capable of. He explains nuclear deterrence theory to us, the idea that no nation will be willing to launch a nuclear weapon at their enemy out of the fear that the other country will launch one back at them in retaliation. He further explains that the weak link in the common nuclear deterrence theory is that the country who's launching the retaliatory nukes might not be able to bring themselves to effectively wipe humanity off the face of the earth, but with an automated system, retaliation would be completely guaranteed. He tells us that he worked with them to produce the Peace Walker because he believes in peace through nuclear deterrence, telling us that his father was part of the Manhattan Project, and that the nukes led to him being born without the ability to walk. He also says that if Coldman launches a nuke, all of his work will have been for nothing. He tells us about the brain of the AI system for the Peace Walker called the Cerebrum, saying that we need to find and destroy it if we want to prevent the CIA from completing the Peace Walker. He also tells us about the Cerebrum's lead developer, Dr. Strangelove, handing us a letter that he wants us to give her once we've reached her lab. Snake offers him to join us, telling him that our base is Outer Heaven, and Huey accepts. We go back to Mother Base, and here, the game introduces yet another system for us to engage with. This is the Outer Ops system, which allows us to send members of our combat unit out on missions of their own in hopes that they'll bring back rewards such as unique items or increased revenue. We can also send vehicles of ours out with these troops, so if you're going to be up against tanks, you can send a tank of your own to back your men up. The downside to this is that soldiers can be killed in battle while out on these missions, and if vehicles are completely destroyed, you'll be unable to repair them, and you'll have to go back and capture the vehicle again by replaying the same boss fight if you want to get it back. I really enjoyed the risk-reward factor of this system, and I felt like it was balanced very well, as I would use it whenever I was in a comfortable spot with my resources, but if my finances ever started to run low, I would give it a break for a bit until MSF was in a better spot financially. It's a really fun addition and adds even more reason to engage with the combat unit and the vehicle systems, so I'm personally a really big fan of this one. After checking it out for a bit, we get a call from Huey telling us that he started work on producing a bipedal weapon for MSF, telling us that if we can fight any more AI units, we should try to bring back as many AI cores as we can to him. He also says that our new weapon needs a name, saying that he and Miller were talking about calling it Metal Gear Zeke, naming it after the Japanese Navy's best fighter plane in World War II. He says that Miller was talking about how MSF needed a deterrent to prevent other nations from attacking us, saying that Metal Gear Zeke should be perfect for just that, and he manages to convince Snake to approve the project. And this introduced yet another system to manage back at Mother Base, this being the construction and maintenance of Metal Gear Zeke. Like I mentioned before, when fighting AI weapons like the Pupa, we get a short minigame at the end of the fight where we dismantle the AI, but what I didn't mention is that the player keeps all of the small pieces that they yoink out of the computer. Once we return to Mother Base, these boards are all given to Huey so that he can develop the AI for Metal Gear Zeke. I also didn't mention that during the AI weapon battles, you can actually destroy the weapons that are on the machines, but if you instead make a conscious effort not to, you can then bring those weapons and parts back, once again, to add to Metal Gear Zeke. So as you battle against AI weapons throughout the game, you make more and more progress towards having your own functional Metal Gear, which I shouldn't have to tell you is an amazing form of progression. Once you've managed to fully construct Zeke, you can then deploy it along with your troops on outer ops, which in my experience, all but guarantees your success on an operation. You even get to customize the paint job on Zeke, just reinforcing that this really is your Metal Gear. Back to the story though, we start moving through the jungle to reach Dr. Strangelove's lab, and here we get a really fun new spin on Metal Gear's stealth formula, where enemies are hiding throughout the jungle, trying to get the drop on you rather than just waiting passively to be knocked out or snuck past. We surgically sneak our way by these guards, eventually encountering an Mi-24A attack chopper, which if you ask me, absolutely should have been a Hind D fight, but we're just gonna gloss over that. It's another relatively fun vehicle battle, and much like the armored truck fight from earlier, I managed to meet the conditions for the pilot to pop out, allowing me to capture the chopper for myself rather than just destroy it. Further into the jungle, we run into a seemingly injured French tourist named Cecile. She reveals that she's an ornithologist who came to Costa Rica to find rare birds, saying that it all would have been fine if she hadn't recorded that voice, with Snake realizing that she must be the one who recorded the tape of the boss and Paz's friend who we were looking for. She says that she was captured by the woman she recorded, but she managed to escape and got this far before collapsing from exhaustion. Snake asks her if she learned anything else while captured, and she says that there was another woman who she never saw in person, but that she would often hear her singing a strange song. She says that since they confiscated her passport, she'll never be able to return to her home in France, so Snake invites her to Mother Base, saying that they'll take her back to France once they're able to. He asks her if there's anything else that she can tell us about the base, and she tells us that there's a large tube there that just repeats the name Jack over and over again. We move forward to get to Strangelove's lab, but when we get there, Huey's ID card is denied and we can't get in. We call Huey, and he tells us that Strangelove herself is in charge of the ID system, saying that she must have revoked his access to the lab. Cecile then chimes in, saying that she had an ID card, but that it was taken by a man in an orange jacket, so we'll have to track him down to get it. We then ask Kaz if Cecile and Paz have spoken yet, and he says that while the tape we heard near the beginning of the game was in fact Cecile's, she and Paz have never met before, meaning that we actually still haven't found Paz's friend. We go out to find the man with the orange jacket, and unfortunately, this is just a very unnecessary bit of padding. In order to find him, we need to play the level that we just played to get to the lab, but in reverse, with him being found at the very beginning of it. Then, once we do find him and get the card, we need to run all the way back to the lab as well, which, while not the biggest deal, is just another few minutes of running around that we really didn't need to do. I'm not sure why the team felt the need to pad out Peace Walker's runtime, because as we'll come back to later, this isn't a short game by any means, and this also isn't the last time that we'll be seeing some very blatant padding. Once we're back to the lab though, we enter it, finding the boss's horse as well as Dr. Strangelove. Strangelove tells Snake that she knows what he did 10 years ago, telling him to kill her just like he killed the boss. Snake tells her that the boss defected to the Soviet Union, meaning that he had no choice but to kill her to prevent an all-out nuclear war. He asked what her relationship to the boss was, with her saying that she's the one that the boss left behind when she died, hinting at the fact that the two of them may have had a romantic relationship in the past. She asks Snake if he would like to meet her, taking us to a room with an AI pod, saying that while we took the boss's life, she gave it back. We learn that the AI model Strangelove has created is based off of the boss's personality, and she explains to us that Coldman wanted an artificial mind that would be capable of making the heavy decision when it comes to launching a retaliatory strike, so she went through every file the CIA had on the boss, creating the closest replica to her that she possibly could to fill that role. Strangelove then tells us to complete our mission, allowing us to go into the pod, and as we're dismantling it, the AI constantly repeats quotes from MGS3, telling us over and over again to go home. The AI then starts to have some sort of unexpected reaction, which causes Snake to pass out, having a dream where he relives one of his last conversations with the boss. After a couple minutes, we wake up outside of the lab, and we're immediately confronted by the Chrysalis. We of course get into a boss fight against it, and much like the pupa, this is a pretty solid fight. We run around, avoiding its machine guns and missiles, and returning fire when we get the chance to, and there are even a couple new gimmicks added in here. The first of these is that there's a very thick fog that rolls into the map from time to time while fighting, and the Chrysalis will take advantage of this, flying further away and making it more difficult to keep track of where it is. On top of that, it will periodically deploy smaller drones known as kidnappers, which will attempt to literally lift you up into the sky and drop you if you don't destroy them quickly enough. And once we defeat it, we get another minigame where we run in and grab as many AI boards as we can before the pod detaches itself and flies away. After destroying the Chrysalis, we get a call from Kaz, who tells us that we found the location of the Peace Walker research lab, telling us that we need to make our way there and destroy it. He asks Snake if he's sure that he can pull it off, saying that destroying the AI will mean reliving the memory of killing the boss. Snake seems sure he can do it, but Kaz tells him that he's already given up his country, his past, and his ideals, saying that by letting go of the boss, Snake will have nothing left to ground him. Regardless, the Peace Walker is nearing its completion, so we have no other choice but to go there and destroy it for the sake of mankind. We travel to the mine base where they brought the Peace Walker, and when we get there, we're suddenly ambushed by enemy troops and kidnapper drones. This is yet another fun set piece, but it made me realize that a really nice addition to this game would be some sort of recommended equipment for each mission. Missions like this one don't require you to bring any one item, but due to the size of the canyon and the fact that you'll be up against enemy snipers, you'll clearly want a sniper of your own here. But the thing is, the game has a 2-weapon limit, and there's no way to know that you're going to be put into a situation like this before deploying for the mission, so if you want to change your gear for better convenience, you'll have to go back to the menu, change your loadout, then load back in and play it from the start again. Something as simple as adding a line of text to the mission briefing that says, hey, this is a stealth mission, so you'll want some sort of suppressed weapon, or hey, this is a long-range combat mission, so you'll probably want a sniper, really could have gone a long way here. And while it's not the end of the world that the game doesn't have them, I thought I would bring it up because of the few times I did have to quit out of a mission just to change my loadout. Once we've cleared all of them out though, we're confronted by yet another AI weapon, this time in the form of a colossal tank called the Cocoon. We need to run around the edge of the canyon, avoiding the various forms of weaponry that this thing has mounted on it, from machine guns to chain guns to missiles and even a chainsaw, while slowly firing back at specific weapons to try to destroy them and weaken the Cocoon's offense. After dealing enough damage to it, it will eventually get stuck, allowing Snake to climb up the ladder on the side of it to get a better shot at its weapons, but it will try even harder to defend itself while Snake is up on top of it. It's a wild David and Goliath kind of boss fight where you can slowly feel the dynamic shift from you being the hunted to the hunter, and it's easily the best boss of the bunch so far. Once we're done with that though, we enter the underground facility, making our way to the Peace Walker's hangar. Once there, Snake crawls into the Peace Walker's AI pod and asks the AI if she has any regrets about her final mission in Groznygrad. She says that she never had a mission there, and even after Snake tries to remind her of what happened, she says that there's no record of such a mission. This causes Snake to finally realize that it isn't actually the boss, and he prepares to destroy the AI before we're confronted by Coldman, Strangelove, and their troops. Coldman reveals to Snake that he was the one who planned Operation Snake Eater, saying that he's here in Costa Rica because he wants to create a new world order. He explains that humans are incapable of using nuclear weapons to destroy themselves, saying that they need the cold, calculated nature of a machine to have a real nuclear deterrent. He says that once the Peace Walker has proven itself, they'll deploy Peace Walker units all over Central America, giving them a new edge in the Cold War. He tells Snake that the age of heroes died with the boss, saying that our new heroes going forward will be the machines. He explains that if he's going to sell his nuclear deterrent, MSF and Metal Gear Zeke will have to go, but Strangelove tells him to spare us, telling Snake that he's going to help her resurrect the boss and having us taken away to a torture chamber. We cut to Snake strung up in the chamber, with Strangelove torturing us for answers about the boss. We get a minigame that's very reminiscent of MGS1, where we have to mash the triangle button to resist the torture, before she asks us about the snake-shaped scar across Big Boss's chest, but he refuses to explain how he ended up with the exact same scar as the boss. She continues to ask Snake if the boss died for America, but he continues to tell her that she was a traitor who sold the US out, still not wanting to come to terms with the fact that he killed her for no reason. Snake tells her that whatever's inside that machine isn't the boss and that she needs to realize that before she shocks us again, causing us to pass out. We wake up in a cell with no equipment, and after looking around for a while, I walk up to a mirror where Snake pulls a small steel saw out of the scar in his chest, revealing that it was actually a fake scar used to hide this saw in case he was ever captured. I use it to start sawing through the lock, but after I get about halfway through it, one of the guards comes back over to bring me in for another round of torture, making it even more similar to the MGS1 segment. Once back in my cell again, I saw the rest of the way through the lock, staging my escape from the prison. Once we're out, we get in touch with Kaz again, and he tells us that he can't get into contact with Paz. He says that he sent someone to check in on her, but he was told by someone else in the same hideout that the professor and Paz haven't been seen in a while. Snake tells him that it's possible the CIA captured them, but we need to destroy the Peace Walker before it's too late, so for now, we just hope that they're okay and continue on. We make our way back to the hangar, finding that Coldman has in fact captured Paz, and he tells us that the Peace Walker's activation sequence is complete. Strangelove commends us for our loyalty to the boss, but she says that our silence was the exact answer that she needed, saying that thanks to us, the final piece is now in place. Coldman then tells us that he's already selected the Peace Walker's initial target, saying that he's targeting a small trade island just off the coast, adding that someone built a pesky little base right in the middle of the target area, revealing that he's going to prove the Peace Walker's value by launching a nuke at Mother Base. He reiterates once again that nuclear weapons are a necessity to maintain peace in today's world, activating the Peace Walker and leaving the hangar with Paz. We quickly climb back up to the surface to intercept the Peace Walker, finally getting into a battle with the titular weapon. It's a classic Metal Gear battle, with us fighting this massive mech that's equipped with missiles, a flamethrower, and of course, the ability to trample us if we get too close. After we bring it down, it manages to stand back up, walking towards us while the AI is freaking out until it suddenly just stops. It sits there for a moment in silence before it then suddenly transforms into a quad-legged walking tank and chases after Coldman and Strangelove's chopper. Just then, the boss's horse jumps in, picking us up so that we can go and chase after it. We do so, avoiding missile fire and falling trees along the way until our horse suddenly falls while climbing a cliffside. By the time that Snake manages to pull himself up and over the cliff, we see the Peace Walker swimming across the border into Nicaragua, escaping from us for the time being. We get a call from Kaz and Amanda tells us that she and the rebels have a route that they use to move across the border, so they'll be able to get us over there pretty easily. Kaz then mentions that there's a summit between the US and the Soviet Union happening tomorrow, and that must be why Coldman chose to test the Peace Walker today, likely intending to shake up the negotiations by making the Peace Walker's existence known. Amanda and Chico take us across the border into Nicaragua and into a CIA base, so we go to reach the communications tower and find a way to prevent them from firing the Peace Walker. Once we get there, we find a camera feed of Paz, speaking to her through the camera for about a minute before an alert is suddenly raised and we realize that the enemy knows that we're here. We get a call from Kaz telling us that all of MSF is on their way to back us up, and Paz tells us not to worry about her, saying that she's an angel of peace watching over us. We get this insane combat level that is packed to the brim with the toughest enemies in the game, capped off with a helicopter battle with the game's new song Heaven's Divide playing in the background. I'm not a big fan of this level personally, as I think the Peace Walker's combat feels pretty bad even after you've managed to adjust to the weird controls, and the level being really difficult on top of that just turned this into one of the most frustrating missions in the game for me. We eventually find Coldman and pause, with him telling us that the false data has already been sent, explaining that since the Peace Walker is a deterrent tool, it's incapable of launching a nuclear strike on its own. As such, they've sent false data to the Peace Walker's AI to convince it that a nuke has already been fired at it, and it will then be able to launch a retaliatory strike on MSF's base. The professor from earlier then walks in, telling us to stand down, revealing that he and his men have already taken over the base. Coldman calls him a backstabber, but the professor rebuts that they were always enemies, and he was simply using him all along. He reveals that he's going to use the Peace Walker to fire a nuclear strike at Cuba and blame the strike on the US, and it will be easily believed as the nuke was fired from a US base using US technology. The professor then hands Paz a gun, telling her to shoot Coldman, and telling her that his first name is Vladimir Zadornov, a name that means ruler of peace. Paz can't bring herself to pull the trigger though, so Zadornov grabs her hands and forces her to shoot him, before walking over to Coldman, stomping on him, and forcing him to give up the launch code. He then tells Strangelove to change the Peace Walker's target to Cuba, threatening to destroy her beloved AI if she doesn't do as she's told. He then turns to us, telling us that we've done everything that he had hoped we would, meaning that once again, we were simply used as a tool of the government, only now it was by the Soviet Union rather than the US. He tells us that we're going to die here, saying that we'll be an eternal fraud just like the boss, but just then, the MSF and rebel troops burst in, shooting his men and taking him hostage. Some of the rebel troops start to celebrate that they're back in Nicaragua, referring to Amanda as Comandante rather than by her first name. The MSF troops bring Paz back to base, taking Coldman and Zadornov as well to be thrown into the brig, and everything seems to be nicely wrapped up, but Snake tells Kaz that he still has to destroy the AI to set everything right, and he and Strangelove go to destroy her for good. In the helicopter, Coldman musters up the strength to enter the Peace Walker's firing code into his laptop, and Kaz calls Snake to tell him that the Peace Walker is not only active again, but it also sent the false data to NORAD on its activation, meaning that not only is the Peace Walker going to fire a nuke, but the US will likely launch a retaliatory strike as well. Coldman corrects Kaz though, saying that the US will never actually retaliate, explaining that this is simply to prove that humans are incapable of pushing the launch button. He says that the only person who knows the code to deactivate the Peace Walker is him, adding that he hopes his theory for peace was right all along, before throwing up one last peace sign and bleeding out. We eventually catch up to the Peace Walker, getting into another battle with it to try to prevent the launch. It's essentially just the first Peace Walker fight, but juiced up like crazy thanks to the new quad-legged form and all the new attacks that come with it. It's also an absolute endurance match, as this thing has such a large health bar that my first successful run took me a little over 15 minutes. And in total, my second battle with the Peace Walker took more than an hour with all the failed attempts in there, so be warned if you haven't played the game for yourself yet, this thing is waiting at the very end to kick your ass. Once we've defeated it though, Huey tells us that NORAD still believes there's an inbound nuclear strike, as the data uplink from the Peace Walker is still intact. He says that we'll need to destroy the AI pod to stop the data from being sent out, but the armor on the pod was built to withstand even a nuclear war, so we don't exactly have an easy way to do that. We see that the US government is actually going to fire a nuke in retaliation, and Huey tells us that if we drop the Peace Walker deep enough into the water, the pressure from being deep in the water might be enough to break open and destroy the pod. Huey gets us on the phone with the Pentagon, and we explain the situation to them, but they don't believe any of what we're saying, or even the fact that we're Big Boss. The man on the phone says that he was there for the ceremony where Snake received the title though, so Snake tells him that when the DCI reached out to shake his hand, he refused, saying that no one who wasn't in the room for the ceremony would know that. It convinces the man on the phone to let down the alert, but another man in the room holds the chairman at gunpoint, still not believing our story and telling him that they're not standing down. Just then, the Peace Walker's AI pod opens itself up, calling out for Snake. We jump in, dismantling the AI as quickly as we can, while she continues to repeat voice lines from the events of MGS3. As we do more damage to the system, we get increasingly strange lines of dialogue, which is very reminiscent of GW's malfunctions near the end of MGS2, until eventually, we kill her entirely. Once she's been completely dismantled though, the signal continues to broadcast, and Strangelove remarks that even though the brain is dead, the body is still functioning. Everyone starts to accept their fate, but Snake yells at them to not just stand there, taking up his rifle and shooting at the Peace Walker again, which causes the AI pod to reactivate. This time though, the light color changes to yellow instead of red. The Peace Walker then stands back up, walking into the water, with Snake and Strangelove realizing that the boss is drowning herself to prevent a nuclear war. The two of them stand there, trying to come to terms with what's happening in front of them, before the Pentagon stops receiving the signal, and the credits roll. But at the end of the credits, we get a message saying that the story is still to be continued in Chapter 5, meaning that while this is the end of the main story, there is still an epilogue for us to get through. And as always, we get a post-credits scene here as well. We hear Kaz asking Snake to come back to Mother Base, but Snake tells him that he's not going back. He says that he's done looking for the truth, saying that the boss betrayed him. Kaz is confused by this, and Snake explains that by giving up during the fight between the two of them, she rejected her entire life up to that point, saying that when she gave up her life, she also abandoned everything she was as a soldier, including being Snake's mentor. Snake says that he won't be making the same choices she did, telling Kaz that from now on, he should call him Big Boss. Once back in the menu, Kaz asks Snake if Paz can stay with them for a while, saying that since all of her funding was coming from Zadornov, she has nowhere to go now. He says that Strangelove also wants to join up now since she's out of a job and it would be a bit complicated for her to return to her home country of England. But even though the credits said there was more main story content left to go, there are no main story missions available in the menu, so for the time being, I decided to run through a few side missions to see if the story simply developed through the passage of time. After completing a mission, I get a call from Huey and Strangelove, with the two of them explaining that they've finished creating an AI for Metal Gear Zeke, meaning that we now have a deterrent much like what the Peace Walker was intended to be, minus all that replicating the boss's mind business. After this, we go on a date with Paz, but isn't she supposed to be 16 years old? Well, maybe it's just Big Boss being cute and taking her out of the base to make her feel better and... Oh god. Yeah, that was deserved.
Foxtrot.
Room for one more?
Aha.
Once we're past that, we get a call from Kaz telling us that Zadornov escaped from his cell and he needs us to go and track him down. While I'm out looking for leads, I get another call from Kaz saying that we got a package with a cassette tape and the return address simply says Eva. In this tape, Eva tells us that she's heard about our efforts in Nicaragua, but that's not why she's sending us the tape. She goes on to explain what the boss was doing in the years leading up to the Virtuous mission, explaining her role in the Cold War space race, as well as how she went from being a renowned war hero to being the CIA's tool to use as they please. It's a really nice little side story that they've included here, but it's also more than 30 minutes of just straight exposition, and this video is already long enough. It's also not terribly important to Peace Walker's plot directly, being included more for fans of MGS3, so I don't feel too bad about skipping over most of it here, and if you're interested, you can definitely search up the Eva tapes here on YouTube. Going out for a little more searching, I eventually find Zadornov just crouched in the corner of this random building, knocking him out and hitting him with the Fulton to bring him back to Mother Base. After this, we put him back in the brig, and once again, there are no new main missions available, so I just go out doing some side gigs for a bit. After a few more side missions, we get another call from Kaz, telling us that Zadornov is on the loose again. I go out searching, eventually finding him laying down in the middle of the jungle, taking him back in once again. And yet again, there are no new main missions after this, so I go out doing some more side missions and grind out some AI parts for Metal Gear Zeke while I wait for more to come up. And just as a side note, the AI part grind for Zeke is a crazy grind, and if you've ever completely maxed it out, kudos to you. After a bit, I get a call from Kaz, who tells us that they've recovered the Peace Walker's nuclear warhead from the lake it drowned in. He says that if they left it in there, it would have polluted the water beyond repair, so they took it on themselves to remove it. He recommends that we hold onto it for safekeeping, saying that it's probably best to equip it to Metal Gear Zeke for storage. At first, Snake seems hesitant, but he eventually agrees with Kaz, saying that if other nations possess nuclear weapons, then we need to possess them ourselves for protection. And once again, I love moments like this where we see Big Boss slowly giving into ideals that will clearly put him down the wrong path and eventually lead to the events of the original Metal Gear. We got a bit of this at the end of Portable Ops, and I'm very happy to see that we get a bit of it here at the end of Peace Walker as well. After another handful of side missions, I get a call from Kaz again, telling me that Zadornov has escaped from his cell yet again. And don't worry, I'll spare you the rest of the runaround on this by just ripping the band-aid off here. This game's main story content after the end of Chapter 4 is a total disaster. This whole pattern of doing side missions until Zadornov escapes just to go out and recapture him is repeated a total of 6 times, meaning that you spend hours of gameplay just going out and grinding through random missions until the dude escapes again, allowing you to recapture him just so that you can return to the grind yet again. Chapter 5 seemingly exists mainly to ease you into the endgame grind by forcing you to complete side missions to allow Zadornov to escape, on top of the other prerequisites that are required to earn the true ending of the game. Alongside recapturing Zadornov 6 times, you also need to have your base built up to a certain level, which I thankfully already did during my playthrough, and you have to have completed Metal Gear Zeke, including having it outfitted with extra optional parts like the railgun and the jetpack. So not only are players required to grind out extra side missions, but they're also required to grind the AI bosses over and over again for parts, and for players who aren't totally on top of the base management during the initial run of the story like I was, you'll also have to go out and grind for all of that stuff too. This all would have been fine if the game was simply building towards some kind of secret endgame boss fight, but they actually tied a significant portion of the game's story, and especially Big Boss's character development, into this chapter, meaning that if you want the full Peace Walker experience, completing Chapter 5 is 100% mandatory. At least I found a healthy way to take out my frustration at the chapter though. After a few more hours of gameplay, I get the 7th call from Kaz telling me that Zadornov has escaped, but this time he's apparently managed to disable the tracker that we had placed on him, so we have no idea where to even look this time. This is easily the most egregious example of Peace Walker padding itself for length, as if you want to go out and naturally search for Zadornov, you're going to be loading into over 150 different missions and searching every nook and cranny to try to find where he is. So I did what any rational player would do at this point and just went to Google to figure out where the hell he is, because quite frankly, I was not willing to load into all those different missions to search for him myself, especially after how long I had spent even getting here. I get the answers I'm looking for and head to the firing range in Mother Base, finding him hiding out on a catwalk up above. When we confront him, he tries to shoot at us, so Snake shoots back, hitting him in the chest. He tells us that his work is finally done, shooting his robotic hand at us and throwing up one final peace sign before dying. Snake calls Kaz, telling him that he had to kill Zadornov, but also saying that he thinks Zadornov had someone from within MSF helping him. Just then, Kaz starts panicking, telling us that it's Zeke and we need to get up to the top of the base. When we get there, we see that someone has activated Metal Gear Zeke, and it's revealed that Paz is the one who's in control of it. And she's in her underwear, for some reason. She reveals that Zadornov's repeated escapes were a diversion to allow her to modify Zeke to be controlled by a pilot rather than by the AI that we made for it, telling us that she's going to be taking it and bringing it back to her boss Cypher. She tells us that she's been an undercover agent this entire time, and that the real Peace Walker project can now finally begin. She drops a lot of hints at Cypher potentially being Zero from MGS3 before telling us that she's going to use Zeke to launch a nuke at the east coast of the United States, causing MSF to look like an extremist cult of soldiers and giving the US a good reason to take us out and rid themselves of the threat that we pose to them. We get a boss fight against Metal Gear Zeke, and here I really regret equipping this thing with a railgun and rocket boosters. It bounces around the Mother Base facilities, attacking us by firing the railgun, missiles, using the boosters to run us over, and more, leading to a pretty chaotic fight. But luckily, Mother Base is pretty upgraded by this point in the game, so you can use the computer terminals around the base to call in care packages or turn the base's automated defenses against Zeke. So as strong as Zeke is, Snake is also given some new tools to help even things out. And thankfully, it's one of the most enjoyable bosses in the game, so the multiple hours of grinding just to get here did feel somewhat justified. Once we defeat Zeke, Paz tells us that as long as the world needs an army like ours, they'll never know peace. She tells us that they will use us and then throw us out once they're done, like a cancer on society, telling Snake that this is the path that he's chosen before Metal Gear Zeke explodes, sending her plummeting into the ocean below. Huey then calls, saying that it's shocking that Paz betrayed them, but telling Snake not to beat himself up over it, saying that no one could have seen it coming. He tells us that he needs to go talk to Strangelove about Zeke, and we get a bit of a romance scene between the two of them, meaning that it's likely that Dr. Strangelove is Otacon's mother. We then cut back to Kaz and Big Boss, with Kaz saying that he owes Snake an apology, telling him that he knew who Paz and the professor were from the beginning, and that he even brought them to Columbia himself. He reveals that Paz was a triple agent working with the CIA, KGB, and the Cypher Group all at once, and Snake starts to get very reasonably pissed off at him, but he says that without them, MSF couldn't have become what it is now. He explains that in the near future, there will be a good amount of money in armies like ours, telling us that we've set up a business that will be in high demand very soon. Snake reflects on all that happened, saying that they were never meant to take a side in an international conflict, but they did, and in the process, they upset the global balance of power. He tells Kaz that they'll be hunted as they're a new wrench in the theory of deterrence, saying that they'll need to fight the establishment. Kaz asks who will be hunting them, and Snake tells him that they'll be fighting the most powerful establishment of all, the Times. He says that the hunt is on, telling Kaz to assemble the men, and we fade to credits for real this time. We then get another post-credits scene where we hear Snake giving a speech to his men, saying that they are an army with no nation, no philosophy, and no ideology. He tells them that they don't fight for anyone but themselves, and they don't need a reason to fight, they fight just because they are needed. He says that if the times demand it, they'll be revolutionaries, criminals, or terrorists, but that there is no better place for them than here, finishing the speech by saying that this is outer heaven. And with the game now actually finished, I'm pretty mixed on Peace Walker's story. I absolutely love Big Boss's character progression here, and I think that there are a ton of great interactions between him and the other characters, but I think that the plot gets a little messier here than it does in most Metal Gear games. Certain characters repeat themselves a ton, like how Coldman can't be in a single scene without explaining the theory of nuclear deterrence again, and some characters like Cecile are essentially forgotten immediately after they're introduced. The best way I could describe my feelings is that I personally enjoy the story a lot, but if we're going to sit here and talk about the quality of the narrative and the writing, there's a ton of things that I could sit here and pick apart, and like I said, it's a larger amount than usual for the Metal Gear series. Which, with the amount of contradictions and retcons that this series has, is actually saying quite a bit. I feel pretty much the same way about a couple other games in the series like MGS 3 or 4, but the difference here is that, at least for me personally, this game's story doesn't quite reach the emotional highs that those two did. Overall though, I had an absolute blast with Peace Walker. The gameplay here is really good despite the low frame rate and poor controls, and the gameplay loop takes everything that made Portable Ops so addictive and just makes them even more so. That being said, the pacing in this game isn't great, and there were a lot of times where it felt like the story was either moving way too fast or way too slow. And that's before you get to the final chapter of the game, which, even though I cut it down a lot for the video, took up about 5 hours of my 22-hour playthrough, which is a ton of time spent considering how little story content you get in return. The final boss fight and true ending of the game are both genuinely really good. I just wish that the process of getting to them didn't cause the game to drag on for so long right at the end. But what I really want to emphasize here is that even though there are a lot of things holding Peace Walker back, it still manages to be one of my favorite games in the series despite all that. It has plenty of problems, but the magic is definitely still there, and if you haven't played it for yourself, you absolutely should, especially if you can get your hands on the PS3 release, or if you're watching this far enough into the future, I'm sure that the inevitable Master Collection Volume 2 will have a better version than the PSP one as well. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker an 8.9. Hey guys, thanks for coming by. If you're looking for more Metal Gear videos like this one, check out the playlist right here. And if you want to help keep the series going, maybe swing by my Patreon page. I know that these videos have been taking a longer time than usual due to their length, but regardless, you guys have put a smile on my face with the gigantic amount of support you've been showing, so I have to say, thank you all for watching, and I'll hope to see all of you right here for the next Metal Gear review.